All right. Well, welcome everybody to this live streaming of painting with Steph Littlebird Fogel. My name is Aaron Zettler-Mann. I'm the Watershed Science Department Director here at the South Yuba River Citizens League, and I'm very excited to have Steph Littlebird Fogel with us, who's the artist that did our wonderful art for the festival. Steph is an Indigenous artist, writer, and maker hailing from the Portland, Oregon area, and really focuses on drawing connections between our collaborative past and kind of the imminent future. Fogel mixes her tribal traditions with contemporary materials and subject matter. I'm very excited to have her here to create a beautiful artwork that, like I said, appears on our 2021 official poster. Fogel graduated from the Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, Oregon in 2015, and her work has been featured in a lot of really interesting places, the United Nations. She was the artist in residence at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. Her art has also been featured by the Environmental Protection Agency, the Oregon Bee Project, and the U.S. Postal Service. And what she's going to do today is we're going to have a live Q&A session, and she's also going to be painting live for us. And as a reminder that at the end, this painting, when completed, will be part of our live art auction. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And maybe to kick it off here with, kick off the conversation, you talk a little bit perhaps about how your kind of Indigenous roots have inspired some of the art that you've done and maybe some of these pieces?
Yeah, so my Indigenous heritage, I'm actually a registered member of the Grand Ronde Confederated Tribes of Oregon. And so there are over 30 tribes as a part of that confederation. And I am specifically Clatsop Chinook and Calipoyan. So those histories inform my work in many ways. And so a lot of my work revolves around being an Indigenous person and Indigenous culture, but much of my work outside of that is activist in nature, relates to environmentalism and how individuals can contribute to a better environment. And so a lot of the things that I like to do relate to connecting people with nature and the land and trying to remind them of their connection to it, because a lot of us, I think we're separate from it. So the work that I make is very much informed by the cultural beliefs that I have and then sharing them with other people.
That's great. Thank you. And so I imagine that striving to try to draw attention to that connection also plays into your interest and desire to work in this sort of intersection of art and science.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've been very lucky. I went to a pretty radical art school in Portland where many of the teachers were sort of experts in their own field outside of that. And so we had some really unique teachers, like one named Emily Bosanquet, who used to work for NOAA, and then she came to work at the art school as a science teacher, and she started this program called the Art Science Initiative, and it's gone on to become a larger national program with the ACAD schools, but it initially started off at my school, and I was one of the very first artists to win a grant from them, essentially. And my first project working with NOAA was called Keep Salmon Off Drugs. And it was a public art campaign to educate people about how pharmaceuticals are getting into our watersheds and basically trying to get them to not flush them down the toilet. And so we created public education campaigns around that. And so it's this really cool thing where I get to do the thing that I do, which is make images and also make them work towards bettering my community, my environment, not just making beautiful images, but making them educational and making them impactful. And so I've been really lucky to have many projects like that. Like this whole past year, I've been on a national fellowship again with NOAA. And so, I really love the idea of collaborating with other disciplines. And so that's part of my regular day job. I'm actually a tech writer for Intel. And so I write about AI technology during the day, and then I paint and work with scientists in my off time. So it's just something that I love to do and I'm good at doing. So I'm very lucky that I've gotten all of these jobs to do that, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. As somebody that has a deep science background and geographic background and has done some teaching, I can very much relate that and appreciate the need to have better communication and a little more intuitive communication, because trying to explain some of the complex concepts that I work with on a day-to-day basis to people and sort of create that messaging can be a real challenge. And so having especially creative, artistic, and kind of inspiring ways of going about that aren't just graphs and charts or maps, which is what I tend to end up with, is pretty nice.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just did a lecture for 75 NOAA scientists, and my lecture was how art can help science and management, because as you can tell through what's happening on a global and political scale in terms of our nation, science is not necessarily a trusted institution right now. And so I believe that art can help bring trust and empathy into the conversation. And that's really what's missing from science, is its language is inaccessible, and the way that it's communicated is not accessible to regular people. And so that's what I feel like my job is just trying to make the amazing work that you guys do make sense to everybody else.
Yeah, and creating that empathy, from sort of, the cold truth, if you will, of a graph or a chart, something like that, and kind of making it a little more human. And you can bring in the challenges and the pain and the uncomfortableness of whatever it is, whatever the topic, if it's climate change or something like that. You can bring that into an art and hold some of that a little more sacred and a little more, give that a little more power, and not just say, pharmaceuticals down the toilet are terrible and you're a bad person. We can, it's a little easier to have both of those in something like art.
Yeah, it's easier to connect people's hearts. And that's really what's missing, is that people have to understand why they need to care. Why should they care?
Right.
A lot of the work that I did this year in 2020 with NOAA was educating, how do we educate the public that Chinook salmon are, specifically the winter run, are about to go extinct in Northern California. And the idea is, well, it's not, graphs and charts aren't going to make people care. What people care about is like what affects their daily lives. And so creating work that shows people the connection of salmon to their daily lives is really important. And so that's what I've been doing for the last year with the NOAA scientists, is trying to make that work ring into people's hearts and minds, as opposed to like, we're going to hit you with some facts right here. And it's like, well, facts are, they're loose these days. So we got to hit people where it counts. So
exactly.
It's the only way to get people to actually like move. So you can make somebody learn something, but what makes them act and make them react? So emotions are a good way to go about that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think people are more interested in seeing you and your art than me. So I think I'll still be here to answer or sort of feed questions, but you won't be able to see me. And then maybe as I kind of transition, you can talk just a little bit about what you're envisioning for this piece of art that you're about to start.
Sure. So I thought what I would do is show the folks who are watching, if you can see this. This is a digital illustration that I just finished as part of my NOAA fellowship and working with the scientists. And if you look on the inside, it's kind of hard to tell, but this is a Yuba River, like the watershed specific illustration. There's actually 3 forks of the river back here. And so what I did this on my tablet, and now I'm actually going to just paint it a little bit larger on this canvas here, and use my digital illustration that I did to sort of inform the work that I'm going to do here with color. So I'm going to show this a little bit closer to you as well. So I put all the lines in there, all the black lines are on. I feel like my brain works like a coloring book, and that I put lines first before I do anything else. And so this is
basically at a point now where I get to add color. And so I did all the line work first just to save people the boring details, but you can see the color a little bit more as I go. And basically I work in acrylics, so I don't use oils because I don't always have like an open area to work where I have to worry about ventilation and things of that nature. So I like to work with acrylics because they're cheap and they're accessible, and you know, I can make them do whatever I want at this point. I've been working in acrylics for I think 15 years. So I'm familiar with them as a medium. And so I know how to make them do what I want. And yeah, so what I'm going to start doing right now is I'm just going to start basically laying in some of my colors. And I use a very specific type of paint. It's a brand called Golden, and they're not endorsing me or anything like that, but they have, for me, been the most trusty. And I specifically work with liquid, like very fluid acrylics, not like maybe what most people would assume a heavy body acrylic, which kind of looks like toothpaste. I don't typically use that. And if I do, I will dilute it quite a bit because I prefer fluidity when I'm using my paints. And so most of my paints are very thin, like water. And if I am going to use a heavier body, what I'll use is something that's called open thinner, and it's by Golden as well. But what it does is it dilutes your paint, you know, so it's not as thick if you're going to use the heavy bodies, but it also makes it dry slower. So it's kind of cool because for those folks who are familiar with how oil paints work, they're different than acrylics in that they take longer to dry. And so the open thinner is cool because it thins out my paints, but it also makes them workable for longer. So I can kind of go back in and blend colors a little bit easier than you would with just regular acrylic paint without that open thinner in it. So anyway, I'm going to start by painting in my river.
Already got some inspired people that are looking forward to seeing the finished product in the live chat. When we were chatting kind of before we started here, you mentioned that you'd sort of embraced this artistic gift a little later in life. I'm curious what that transition is, as somebody that has never had a creative or at least artistic bone in his body.
It's a good question.
It sounds like there's still hope.
I was going to say, I believe that everyone is creative, and sometimes you're creative in what you might think is a logical way and that you can maybe move around numbers really creatively. But I say everyone has the ability to think critically, which is what creativity actually is. This painting is basically just thousands of decisions, right? Like there's intuition involved, but over time, I'm just making thousands of tiny little decisions. So I think anyone can be creative, but I grew up in a very small town, as I mentioned before, 500 people. And if you might not have guessed, being an artist in a small town was like questionable. My parents had very rigid sort of roles in mind about how women and men should be. And so I think that they expected me to become something that I just really did not feel I was destined to become. And so I was an artist, regular practicing artist, for almost a decade after high school, but I didn't go to college or anything. I just, you know, got regular jobs and worked in customer service and call centers and things like that. And then I decided, when I got laid off, I was working at Netflix when the recession hit back in 2007 or 8 or whenever it was. And that's when I decided I was going to go back to school. And the only thing that I liked to do at that point was art. And so I said, well, I've envisioned myself as an artist. That's how I see myself. And so I'm going to go to art school because that seems like the logical next step. And so I went to art school and I got my bachelor's in painting and printmaking. Basically, I graduated, I think, in 2015. And, or no, yeah, what? 2015? Yeah, that's when it was. Anyway, and then from there, I've just been working. I've been very lucky. I didn't have to go get a master's. I've been doing lots of really cool projects. And so I've been busy ever since, and very lucky to have so many opportunities. But I honestly think being an artist and committing to it as a life is difficult in a world that kind of like frowns upon the creative lifestyle. And I will say that it is a difficult choice too, because the reliability of income is different for all of us than, you know, if you were just like go into nursing or something like that, you know, where you're like, oh yeah, it's a pretty solid career. And my sister, you know, but both my sisters are in, you know, in the medical field, and so I'm like, I'm the black sheep of the family who was like, I'm going to be an artist, and so I've had to work really hard to sort of, in a way, prove to myself that that was the right decision, and it was. This is what I do, and I feel so passionate about the things that I can do as an artist for others, which I think is a beautiful part about being the artist that I am. Not all artists are concerned with affecting the world, but that is the sort of grandiose dream of me being an artist. And I think why it probably took me so long to get to that point is, I mean, I am a really idealistic person to believe that art can make change in the world, but here I am, I'm trying to do that. And so, I think realizing a dream like that takes a lot of work. So it's not a path that's carved out for you. And so there's no direct way to get here. And it took me a very long time to just build up the confidence to be like, okay, this is who I am. So I'm very grateful I eventually came to that realization that it was okay to just be me and be my artist self.
That's great. So we've got a question from Anne, who actually is an environmental historian and author and did a Q&A yesterday. And she's wondering, have you found that scientists are receptive to your ideas about the power of art?
Yes. Oh, and what a great question. I feel like when I start initially interacting with the scientists, like especially in my last this last national fellowship, I beat out 80 different people from around the country who are graduates of ACAD schools like me. And so I felt like, oh my God, there's a lot of pressure, and I'm just a painter, you know? So I felt like, man, I have to really make sure that I show up for this and do really good. But it took a little bit of time. Basically, I had to teach the scientists how artists think. And what's interesting, and I was sort of shocked by, is that scientists aren't familiar with the process of critique. And critique is a process that we are taught from day one in art school. Basically, anything that you make in art school, you have to present to a group of your peers and listen to them tear it down, basically. And that happens every single week in art school. And so you go through a process of sort of detaching yourself from your work and trying to see it through the eyes of other people. And so I have been teaching this process to the scientists, and it's been this amazing journey for us. We just had a conversation earlier this week, and they were like, we're getting used to the idea that you're eventually going to be gone, and that we aren't going to have this artist that we can just be like, hey, can you make this thing for us? And that from this year of working with me, we have made so many different objects for them to assist in their daily lives as people who engage with the public and nonprofits, and are constantly trying to raise people's awareness about these things. And so I think that over time, they realized just how valuable art is. At first, I think they were like, yeah, this is going to be fun. And then by the end of this year, they really feel like there's so many more things that I could do, and they wish that they could just keep me on. And that's a wonderful compliment to me, that I came in and I did the work that I was supposed to do, that I did show them that we can help them, and that that the work that we make together, because it's not just me making this work. This salmon, let me tell you, has been through like 10 iterations, because the scientists got to make sure that the fin's in the right place and that the beak is the right shape. Because different runs have different shaped beaks, and so it gets very specific. And while most people who look at these things would not know that, this image would not exist without that collaboration, without talking to scientists and having them respond and critique my work. And so I think that we've all learned so much, not just me, not just them. It's been this growth that they realize that there are different ways that they can approach their work. And they have made me change the way I approach my work too. So yeah, I think that I definitely feel like by the end of it, they were just really blown away by the things that were possible. And so that's cool. I think that sets the stage for more artists in the future too, right? So that's the work. I mean, yes, I hope that that's the case.
Yeah. That's great. Well, certainly as a scientist, although not for NOAA, I very much appreciate taking the time to, you know, make it the salmon, the appropriate salmon for the location in this example. We've also had some questions. What are some of the other examples of work that you did for NOAA?
Oh, awesome question. I was going to say that if any of you who are watching are on Instagram, you can go to my or you can go to my page on Instagram, and my handle is @artnerdforever. No numbers in there, all spelled out. And you can see some of the work that I've done for NOAA on there, but I've done all kinds of things. One, I've done this drawing, but I've actually done multiple versions of this image, which the first one was a Shasta salmon, but I've also done things like maps. So I've taken very stodgy looking maps that are supposed to show the life cycle of a salmon, or I did some green sturgeon work as well. But taking these maps and envisioning them to be more exciting with illustration as opposed to just some geographical thing. I've basically just taken pre-existing images and updated them to be more interesting. So imagine a scientist trying to communicate visually. They go about it by like creating a PowerPoint slide and then putting like geometric triangle shapes for the mountains and, you know, like a blue line for the river. So they're not familiar with the modes in which you can communicate visually. And so when they try to communicate visually, because they're not familiar with those things, their visual communication is not always the best that it could be. So I did a lot of work of just like literally updating pre-existing diagrams and things like that, where they are sharing with the public about, in the case of the project that I was working on, specifically reintroduction of salmon above the dams in California. So they're working with tribal entities like the Winnemem-Wintu tribe in Northern California, as well as the Pit River tribe, to reintroduce salmon above the dams to get them into their ancestral spawning grounds, which they aren't able to access currently because of the dams. And so doing diagram updates of things like that, which are actually very complex to represent visually. I also did logos for them. So I ran just a whole bunch of different things. And then hopefully eventually I'll get to do a mural in the spring. We're looking for a location in Northern California to do a mural of this salmon. So, you know, raise your hand if anybody knows where I could do that. But anyway, I'm looking for a place that I can do some public art. But yeah, so I've been very lucky that we've just done a bunch of different stuff, some really more technical stuff, and then some more fun stuff like this where, you know, it's salmon and landscape. It's very emotive and emotional, but also done some very direct like maps and logos. So
That's great. Well, as somebody who does a lot of map making and enjoys it, I would say if there is an artistic creative side to me, it is when I start trying to make maps, and you know, from taking classes at the University of Oregon in the cartography lab, the infographics lab there, discovered what passes for artistic in my world. I'm excited to take a look at your, sounds like the Instagram handle and some of those other places to get some inspiration, because I've graduated from just all of the ArcMap default settings, which is a huge step in the scientific community and based on the maps and the products that I've seen. And so I'm excited to, take that next step and actually maybe start creating some of my own symbols and that kind of thing.
you should. That's all. I'm like, you should do. Well, can I watch you make maps? I would love to learn from an actual map maker. You know, it's like, I don't know the rules. I'm just like, I'm gonna draw it. If it looks cute, that's good enough for me. So
Yep. Well, you know, one of the things that we talked about was this idea of what's, you know, what is the point of the map and how much information do you need to have? And you know, kind of emphasizing what you need and de-emphasizing other things. And if you need to, you know, move labels a little bit to tell a better story, that's totally okay. And as something that I'm sure you're aware of as well, you know, as I don't want to say a real artist, but you know, a true artist, a professional, that idea of visual hierarchy and layering colors and making sure that the important things sit up on top.
Yeah. You know what? It's so funny. I mean, a lot of what I do in my work is actually just related to how color functions. And I think that people really underestimate how powerful color actually is, and that the way that you combine colors, the way that you stack colors, there's so many ways that you can go about interacting with color that it can be actually a very powerful tool for communicating information. And it's very subtle, but it can be very powerful at the same time. I love color is like my favorite thing in the world, is just bright neon stuff, like, you know, as bright as you can get it. Even when I'm doing something like this where the painting may not look like it has neon in it, it does. I use neon colors in all of my paintings, and they'll get mixed out with other colors, but that's what brings that vibrancy into my work, is that I love to use colors that other people are afraid of. Actually, when I was in art school, all of my professors were just constantly perplexed by my use of color, because a lot of the stuff that I do is in the neon range, or just fully saturated. And so man, I have just always been fascinated by how color works and how our eyes perceive color, and how certain colors go back and certain colors come forward. So yeah, color is a magic that most people don't even realize. It's very important in our world, like psychologically too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you must have studied some color theory. It'd be interesting. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about sort of color theory from an artistic perspective. I've personally seen it, talked and worked with it a little bit in that academic sphere, but I'm willing to bet that talking about those layers and how you think about the approach, and touched on it a little bit, it's discussed differently in the artistic world.
Yeah, I think artists are, I mean, most artists, I would say, not all artists, but most of us are trying to think about how our work functions. And especially if you're someone who like uses color, then you're thinking about how it works. And there's been many cool books and amazing studies done on color. And so when people think about artists, I don't think they think about technique and technical experience and information. And there's very much written on how colors function. There's many artists who have explored how colors function together or with different colors. And there's been all these experiments done in the past to sort of demonstrate the ways in which colors do all kinds of weird things when they're combined in different ways. And so in art school, learning things like the color yellow, if your painting is yellow, it's probably not going to sell. It might sell, but it's less likely to sell. Yellow paintings sell less than any other painting or in any like predominant color. And actually, the studies on yellow are very interesting, in that yellow makes babies cry. So if a baby's in a yellow room, it's more likely to cry, and it'll probably cry longer. And that people who are in yellow rooms tend to feel depressed. So even though it seems like a very bright and like happy color, when people are surrounded by yellow, it actually stresses them out. And the reason is, this is from me learning about natural science, that yellow in nature is considered a warning color, kind of like the color red in some cases too, right? And so yellow is like be careful kind of color. I mean, even when I think about a bee, I think, oh God, you know, I might get stung. So the yellow color produces something psychologically that's like, you know, kind of anxiety inducing essentially. So it makes sense as to why people probably won't buy that yellow painting that you made, you know? So
That's kind of funny.
it's very strange, very strange. You know, even just the way that our eyes function in a painting is really interesting. Like when you go to look at a painting, if it has a human figure in it, your eye is immediately going to make eye contact with the figure first. So they've done all these studies on how people look at a painting, and their eyes immediately, whenever you're looking at a painting of another human being or even another creature, you're always going to look at their eyes first. So you make eye contact with it like it's another person almost. And so it's interesting to think about, well, if you know how people's brains function and what they like and what they don't like, you can actually make better informed decisions when you're creating art. And so I was trying to explain that to the scientists when I did my presentation a couple of weeks ago, is these things that you see in front of you, they didn't just happen. You know,
Right.
they come from much iteration. They come from multiple tries essentially, and going back to the drawing board and teeny tiny little edits, because it's an informed creation, right? It's not just something that I made up out of my brain. So I was actually showing the scientists, I was like, here's a fish that I drew when I first started my NOAA fellowship, and it was a horrible fish. It didn't even look like a salmon. And then and then just, you know, a year later, my recognition of salmon anatomy is completely different, because I've spent so much time engaged with these scientists who are totally obsessed with salmon anatomy, right? But I would never have been good at that unless I had, you know, sort of been able to interact with them. So you, as an artist, you just got to be open to picking up all the information that you can from the world, because ultimately our art is about our audience. So if my work isn't functioning correctly with my audience, then I didn't do a very good job. So
Thank you. So another question that just came up. So when you're just kind of starting to work with a new group of scientists, and you know, maybe the first question will be interested to hear about that process. You know, you first sort of walk into a new office in NOAA, for example, but then also as maybe you're having those initial conversations, how do you start translating that to art? Are you thinking of, are you like keying into certain words or phrases? Are you just looking at, you know, what brings a sparkle to somebody's eye and that's the subject that you focus on?
great
And I can re-ask those as well if you forget.
Well, I think that honestly, whenever, like in the case of working with NOAA, both times that I applied for that opportunity, that was like the context was set by them. So they said, we have all of this work that we just did. We have this huge study that we just did on the watershed, and we found out there's a ton of pharmaceuticals in it, and we got to tell people about it, but we don't know how to tell people about it. And so part of the way that they engage the public was through creativity. And so it starts off as like, we need to tell people about this thing, but we don't really know how to tell people about this thing. And that's kind of where the conversation begins. And then from there, it's really about understanding your audience. Like I said before, if you don't make the work readable to your audience, then it doesn't matter. So I spent a great deal of my summer down in Northern California, exploring the watershed, visiting the dams, understanding the run that salmon make. Now, I didn't know this, but every salmon that comes into California coming underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And so it's fascinating to think about how they're all coming underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, and then they go all their different ways, or they're going up, up to the Yuba, or they're going up to Shasta, wherever they're headed. They're trying to climb the mountains in a lot of cases, and they're getting blocked. And so that was something that I had to understand to really to create work that was relevant, that makes sense. I had to understand that the salmon can't get home. They can't get to their home landscapes. And many of these salmon are genetically predisposed to be what's considered a mountain climber. They need to get to the highest elevation possible in order to spawn. And if they don't, then this, the numbers in that population are going to, shrink or whatever. So yeah, it's really multifaceted, and it depends on the situation and the scientists. Sometimes scientists are not, sometimes they take a little time to warm up, I guess is what I'll say.
That's fair.
I think that's what's great about my personality too, is I can be kind of disarming, and I'm just like, hey, what's up? We're gonna make some art together. Yeah, and so my enthusiasm will eventually break them down to where they become regular people again. And they forget that they're in a bureaucracy that, forces them to worry about regulations all day and that sort of thing. So I think that there's something that's really fun about being an artist, because I get to sort of be what I call an incendiary device, is that you can just drop me in anywhere and I'm not going to follow the rules. I don't really care about sort of the social hierarchies, and I'll ask anybody questions that I want to. And so I think that's great. It's good for people to see that, because especially for NOAA folks who are working in a bureaucracy, who are constantly having to come up against just delays and all kinds of things that make getting things done very difficult, that there are ways that you can expedite that, as opposed to just filling out paperwork, and so
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope that answered some of the questions.
Your description of all of the salmon coming through the Golden Gate Bridge and then spreading out created this great kind of visual in my head of the circulatory system in the human body, and all the blood coming kind of out of the heart and going out to all of your extremities, and then dams in different places as these clots, preventing that circulatory system, kind of creating sort of death above that.
So true. Yeah,
not a great image, but an inspiring image, if not a great one. Another question that we've got here: what responsibility does the audience have to meet artwork kind of where it is and work to understand and interpret what it's saying?
Well, here's the thing, is that I put a lot of that onus on the artist. And some artists are really good at it. Some folks are not necessarily as concerned with how the audience reads their work. So I think that when scientists collaborate with artists, they need to be very, it's hard because they don't really know how to see an artist in that way. But there are some artists who are more adept at engaging with the community, and there are some artists who are just they make for themselves. I'm that way. Some of the work that I make is just for me, and I don't really care what anybody thinks about it. But when I'm working with other people, I really am constantly thinking about how this work is going to be read. And that's what the critique process is about. It's also about, I share these images with my social media following. I have quite a few on Instagram. And so I can test things and see how people respond, if they like it or not. And so there are ways in which you can kind of gauge the successful, if something is successful or not, but that's, it's an individual artist thing. I think it's on the onus of the artist to realize if their work is accessible or not. And that is something that not everybody is it's like,
yeah, and I can imagine it's different if the art is for art's sake versus so much of what you do, where there is an inherent message.
Yes,
there is. Yeah, the communication is central to the art versus other art where it's more of a creative
black square.
Yeah, exactly.
It's up to you, whatever you want it to be.
And that's sort of maybe the point with some of that is, it reflects you.
Yeah. All art is valid. It's just that if you're going to make public work that's meant to be read by the public, then you must absolutely be testing your work and trying to figure out how people respond to it, showing it to other people, getting that feedback. What does this look like? Does this even look like the thing that I think it is? There's some times where I'll show something to somebody and they'll be like, oh yeah, that looks like a blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? I can't. But then it falls back to me because I have to recognize, oh, okay, well, this thing just looks little bit too much like this or whatever it is, so but you also just have to be open to those things and open to recognizing that image making is not always perfect the first time. Like, it's a process of refinement. So that being open to that process is important too when you're trying to make public work that is communicating important information.
Take a minute here to remind folks that are watching that we will be auctioning this piece off that she's painting as part of the Wild and Scenic Film Festival art auction. So keep an eye out for that.
I'll also say I've had a lot of scientists approach me on the side or email me after they've, been to a lecture or something, and they're like, "I'm an artist, but I'm afraid to say it."
That's pretty funny.
Artist, claim it,
Have you followed up with any of them? Have you inspired anybody to come out of the art closet, perhaps?
Yeah, so, okay, there's this one woman who approached me from a lecture that I did with NOAA, and she works, I can't remember where she works, but she works on this very specific, little sea creature that no one knows about. And so she was like, I've always wanted to do scientific illustrations. And so she just sent me a picture of something that she'd done that she hadn't shown anyone. And it was amazing. And I was like, what are you, what's stopping you? Because you obviously have the ability. So what is it? Is it just that you're afraid to claim that title of being an artist? And if so, just claim it, because anyone can be an artist. There's no boundaries to that. Anyone can pick up and become a creative. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to do any of those things. And so I think that that's part of my purpose in this world too, is to be like, you can be an artist too. And that I hope my work inspires other people to be creative too, because I think there's something that connects us to ourselves and our hearts and our spirit when we can be creative and bring things that were only in our minds out into the world. That's a very special thing. And so everyone can do that. It's something that we've been doing as humans for thousands and thousands of years. We've been writing on caves for 30,000 years. And, it's part of your human inheritance. So being a creative is not as mystical or magical as it sounds. This is just something that I got up and I did every single day for the last 15 years. It's just a practice, like being a softball player or something. It's just something that you dedicate yourself to.
So another question came in. What's your favorite subject to paint?
Oh, good question. I was just talking about this too, because I love to paint nature. Anything, but it's what does nature mean really? Anything that's related to nature, whether it be landscapes or animals. I'm known for my totem work, and so I do really cool psychedelic tribal paintings of animals, and that's what people come to me for. And I actually just booked out my entire year on Friday for painting. So 2021 is completely closed for commissions because I'm painting all these animals for people. So I love to just paint anything that's related to nature, but my most favorite thing to paint is the female figure, and the idea of sort of exalting the Indigenous female form, specifically because there's not a lot of portrayal of Indigenous women, and the portrayals of us in media are usually very stereotypical or highly sexualized. And so part of my work as an artist is creating images for young women to aspire and be proud of themselves as Indigenous girls. And so I really, all of my work is really around inspiring people and helping them see their own divinity and their own special, unique qualities, and then hopefully inspiring them to just wear that with pride. Really, honestly, I think that I grew up, as I mentioned in the very beginning, it took me a very long time to accept that this was who I am, because the world didn't want me to be that, and what I realized is that the longer that I denied that this was who I am, the longer it took me to just get to full fruition of my, sort of abundantly available talent. So I feel like if I can encourage people to see themselves more positively and see themselves as important in the world, then that's like my biggest purpose, I think, out of all the things that I do, is just trying to like make people believe in themselves a little bit more. So I do that through many different ways.
Great. So another one that you kind of touched on, but I'll ask the full question. What kind of projects are your favorite to work on, and what made you say yes to the Wild and Scenic's art request?
Oh man, I love working on anything where I'm helping contribute to the betterment of my community, whether it be, say, my Indigenous community or my activist community. Like in this case, Wild and Scenic, asked me. Sorry, I bumped my laptop there. Wild and Scenic asked me to be their artist after I was on a meeting that. Circle, who runs Wild and Scenic, they were having a meeting with NOAA, and I guess we just hit it off. The vibe was right. And so, they asked me to do the work for this year, and I was honestly honored because, again, another project where I can use my skills to support a group of people who are doing good work in the world and are, trying to help the environment just like I am. So to me, it's a dream opportunity because, again, I get to do the thing that I love to do, which is support anyone who's trying to fight for the environment and, for the salmon in particular, or anyone inhabiting the river for that matter. So, yeah, I think the opportunity was presented to me and there was no way I was going to turn it down because it is like the dream opportunity. So, yeah, I feel very lucky to be here chatting with all of you today.
Well, we're certainly very excited to have you here. So as we're getting kind of close, unfortunately, to the end here, one of the other questions that was kind of a longer question that we had, when you are talking to scientists, you touched on the beginning with some of the NOAA stuff where there was very much a project in mind, a message that they really wanted to convey. Have you had the opportunity with some of your other work to, there was a collaboration, but there wasn't necessarily a goal other than art, and you really had to go from, we want art to go with our science and let's figure out what to produce, and there's really like a blank slate? Have you had that experience, and how do you go from kind of just conversations to a product?
Well, and I think the reason, like, I do something very specific. Other artists do other things. So I was just part of the picking for the next NOAA fellow for this next year. And I mean, there's so many different ways that you can go about it. And so it really depends on the artist, right? Because not every artist makes images. Some artists are like installation artists and they work with light and sound. So one of the artists who applied for that fellowship was light and sound installationist, and they make very like impactful visual public work, but it is more ephemeral or temporal in that it's not there forever, right? It's a projection, so it's probably going to be there for like a day or something. So it really depends on the purpose of the group that you're working with and what they're looking for is their end product. Like, are they wanting a big dramatic public event? Well, then they're probably going to go with an artist like that, right? Whereas if they're scientists, I think probably for me, might be the right pick because I'm a little bit more straightforward in that I do illustrations, and so they can see my work functioning already in the things that they do. Whereas like maybe when they see an artist that's doing something really like out, outside of the box that maybe they're like, oh, I don't know, what will we do with this person? So I think it's kind of like when you go to the store and you know what thing does what. Each artist is extremely unique. When you're looking at an artist portfolio, no two portfolios are the same because every artist has different ways of going about things. And so a big part of that is whenever you're working with a group of people, they probably picked you based on what you do already anyway. And so they kind of have an idea of what they're getting themselves into. But you know, it's part of the navigation of projects. Each project is so unique, and each group of people that you work with is so unique. So it's really about, all artists, I think, are extremely dynamic people. And so we're always trying to adapt to one culture. That's what art is about, is sort of a reflection of what's happening in our contemporary lives, right? So anything that's made today is a reflection of the world that we live in today. Whereas you look at work that was made in the 50s or the 60s, it's very much a reflection of that world and the worldview that those artists held at the time. So yeah, I think we're also special and unique, that it depends on who picks you out of that, you know, bucket of artists and what they expect of you. So it also takes some awareness personally to just be like, okay, this is what's going to be expected of me. I've worked in the corporate world for many years, so I understand like big projects and how they come together, and you know, working with a bunch of different stakeholders, those sorts of things. So for me, it's easy to jump into it. It's like being a writer, but instead of me writing an article or something, I'm making an image. And I see it very much in that same way, as taking information and then trying to synthesize it into something that's an end product, no matter what it is.
Yeah, great. Can you, another question here, can you describe, maybe talk a little bit about the process that you went through for creating the art for the Wild and Scenic Film Festival?
Oh yeah, that was awesome because I got to collaborate with Jess and Eric for multiple weeks. So we started off just by meeting and saying, okay, well, they had seen same thing where they saw my work, they knew what I did already, right? And they said, we really like these pieces that you've already made, and so we're looking for something that's kind of in this vein. And so, as I mentioned, I love to depict the female form, and that's part of the illustration that we came up with. Was what they initially said in the beginning is, we love these pieces where you're combining the physical form with the landscape. And so we sort of started with that as our like kernel of inspiration, and saying, okay, we want to create something where the body is part of the landscape. So ultimately we're connecting people back to the land, right? And so we went through multiple iterations of that visual until we came to a sort of final version that you see. And we did that all digitally. And then I also created a painting of the digital, kind of like I'm doing here. So yeah, it was fun. We just, basically I make an image and I bring it to my client or my stakeholder, and I say, okay, what's good, what's not working. And then from there, that's really the starting point always. I think we can imagine imagery, but until we have something to like look at us in front of and say, well, this fin right here, it needs to go back or it needs to go forward, or whatever the details come down to, it's really hard to think about those things unless you actually have a thing to look at. So the process of iteration is really important, and just like making multiples so that you can see different ways to go about something, and then you go, ooh, but the way you went about it here, that's the way that is closest to the way that I'm thinking. So it's more about just being like, here, I present you with a picture. Do you like it or not? And then what do you like about it? And then that helps you to sort of inform your next version of that until you get to a point where your client is like, that's the one.
Nice. That collaborative process.
Totally.
Definitely
yes.
seems like it's been a theme for your art and this communication.
All of my work, even the commission work that I do is really a collaboration with the person that I'm working with. And that's what I love about my work, is when it can be in collaboration with other people, because then the work is not just mine, it's part of them too.
Yeah, and it gets that emotional bond that that we were talking about at the beginning. Yeah. One of the when we first sort of saw your art and it was kind of unveiled to the staff here at Circle, there was pretty universal excitement about it and how well it kind of embodied the theme for this year's film festival, and this idea of resilient by nature. It was pretty cool to be there when we all kind of saw it for the first time and how it resonated so well with us.
And so that's, I mean, you hope that's the case, right? Like, sometimes you work on something and you do a bunch of iterations and maybe it doesn't land, but sometimes it does. And that's, I mean, about being an artist is like the experimentation of it is sometimes those experiments turn into a masterpiece and sometimes they don't, but that's okay because it's all part of that journey to becoming a better creative. And that's sort of my purpose. So I think if that is, I'm happy to hear that because you never know.
Yeah, it very much resonated. And, and continuing our theme of the overlap between art and science, I think the same goes for science, that frequently our experiments, you get sort of this non-result, or, well, it kind of showed what I thought it was going to show, but really it's unconclusive. But boy, when something really hits and it really kind of resonates and changes the way you think about the world, and whether it's art for Wild and Scenic, or any of the pieces that you do, or the work that you did for NOAA and like the impact that pharmaceuticals have on water supplies, when those ideas and that spark happens, it really can kind of create some really interesting conversations and change the way we look at and engage with the world.
Exactly. Well, and that's really what it's about, right? It's about starting the conversation. Art can't fix it because art can't make you do the work. But if art can make you realize that the work is important and worth doing, then that's like the kick in the pants we all need, is that inspiration. So I think inspiration is so underrated. People don't even realize.
Yeah, it's great. Right, well, I might jump back into everybody's video frame here as we start to unfortunately end. I feel like that was a really fast hour. It was a great conversation. Well, with just sort of a few minutes left, I'm quite happy to just watch you create. But want to open it up and see if there are any last minute questions from folks, or if you've got anything else that you want to talk about and kind of share with us about this process and the conversation that we've kind of had and started about this intersection between art and science and how to try to communicate important information in ways that resonate and feel a little bit more emotionally approachable than the academic world tends to allow.
Yeah, I think that's, it's unfortunate, but there's a perceived distance between ourselves and the world around us. And there is this perceived separation that we have, which is more prevalent in non-Indigenous cultures, I think. This idea that we are separate from the land, but in fact, we are very much interconnected and actually interdependent upon one another. And in Indigenous culture, we see the land as our ancestor. We see the land as something that we are responsible for being stewards of. And so in a way that makes me very privileged because I see that connection. I know that connection personally. And so my job is to remind other folks who are not a part of my culture that connection belongs to them too. And so the biggest thing that I took away from my NOAA fellowship this year is that I want my work to connect people with their connection to the land, and to remind them that yes, you're very much connected to all of the environment around you, and not just the environment that's directly around you, but the environment that extends all the way around the world. Like, this idea of interconnected, ecology, and even just like epigenetics, and these ideas that everything is connected. And so the first way that we can overcome some of the problems that we have in our world today, in terms of things going extinct and the ice caps melting, is really just to recognize that all of those things present imminent danger to us.
Yeah.
and that they're part of our own health,
Right.
as a culture and individually. And so, yeah, I think really just reminding people to stay connected to themselves and the earth is a huge part of the work I do. So it looks like it's 11. I don't want to keep yakking, but
Yeah, well, thank everybody. Thank you all for watching, and thank you so much. This has been really enjoyable. And just as a final reminder, the art that she is working on right now will be available for auction here as part of the Wild and Scenic Film Fest. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you all for watching. Have an enjoyable rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.